How's the inner work going? What kind of inner work do you do, Karen? Do you do something on a daily basis?
Oh, yes. I wake up and lie in bed for about a half an hour, praying and keeping a good alignment and trying to stay present with myself. And then I get up and make a coffee and drink that. And then I sit for a half an hour at least, and then try to live my life by the work through the day. And
Okay.
usually that's it. I mean, I try to do everything with intention, wash the dishes as a form of intentional labor. I can't say as I look for ways to suffer intentionally, but my wonderful colleague here once pointed out when I had a very bad facial rash, to not scratch it was a form of intentional suffering.
Yeah.
And that was a really sort of a brilliant moment of understanding how many little things can be an intentional suffering. So through living my life by the work as I understand it, that's what I do.
Yeah, I belonged to a Bennett group a number of years ago, and the leader of the group said to not scratch an itch is more important than to scratch it. We gain something from not scratching itches and dealing with it, and because it's so habitual. Oh, I'm itchy, and we're scratching, and it requires a degree of intent. You say you wake up. Do you mind sharing your prayers? You don't have to. Are they normal prayers, or?
I'm losing your voice.
Okay.
Can you ask me that question again?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if you mind, you say you wake up and you stay in bed and you try to be as present as possible and you say prayers. Do you mind sharing those prayers, or you don't have to if they're personal?
Well, they're generally about gratitude and appreciation for my life, and I've come recently to understand how many people have supported me and been there through my life with me, giving me everything I've needed. I've been completely, it took me a long time to understand how privileged I've been by the means of other people helping me. So that kind of gratitude is something I try to imbue myself with.
Do you do any special routine when you're going to bed, when you're going to sleep?
I usually say the Lord's Prayer to myself. That's about it.
That's about it?
At night.
At night. You don't do anything like the nightly review or relaxing your body?
No, sometimes I do that, but I seem to lose focus at night and just want to go to sleep. So I don't try to get into too many involved thinking. I have done a nightly review, and I do like doing that, but sometimes just even saying the Lord's Prayer, I lose touch with the words and zone out.
Well, J.G. Bennett recommended that, whatever the nightly ritual we do it sitting in a straight-backed chair before we actually lie down in bed, because the chances of us sort of only getting halfway through, increases exponentially when we're lying down. So to do something a bit before.
Good advice. When it's warm, see, we don't have heat here, and we're in a cold wave. So I'm very reluctant to sit out in the freezing cold. When it's nice weather, which is most of the time here, I often do sit in a chair and sit for a few moments before I get in bed. But it's just too cold for that right now for me at the moment when I'm trying to recover and get strength.
And in the morning when you wake up, you said, you used the phrase trying to be present. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by trying to be present?
Well, I stay in my body. I often do the exercise you've said about the holy affirming, holy denying throughout my body as I'm kind of coming awake. I look at a cross on my wall, which focuses my visual attention. What else can I think that I do? I mostly try to wake up with a sense of appreciation for the day that I have ahead and not get involved in petty thinking. That's my biggest attempt to stay with the moment, not into the future day.
I mean, last week, I'm not sure if we lost your connection before then. I said that I had noticed myself that because I traced it to starting yoga, that I wasn't quite as present throughout the day as I normally am. And then after talking about it last week, I realized that I usually spend 10 minutes in my bed really inhabiting my body. That's been one of my routines, to really fully and completely sense my body and hold that sensation of self. And because I've been going to yoga in the morning, I haven't been doing that. I've been kind of getting up and then, getting my day, getting the dog walked and all these different things before I can do that. And that's what I was missing. Something sort of between the transition of when I wake up to when I get going. They say that we're most together at that moment when we wake up, in terms of, balanced and whatever. And if we just jump out of bed, it's, we're not quite in the collected state anymore, and we tend to be more scattered. So that's what I was doing. And I've noticed this week, when I set my alarm a little bit earlier and I take that 10 minutes to do what I've been doing before, it has this ripple effect throughout my day. Ian, what do you do in the morning? Seeing as though we're talking about that.
What do I do in the morning? Excuse me. I don't do it every day, but I do when I wake up, try to, similar to you, kind of be present in my body, remember that it's there, inhabit it. I don't have a real regular morning routine, the way it sounds like you're all sort of discussing at the moment. But yeah, trying to be slow. And actually, one of the big things for me is not getting caught up in things. So, having a bit of a routine. So I get up, I'll go to the bathroom, but I try not to, bust out the phone and start checking things or start worrying about my day. Just like, whatever it is that I'm doing, I just try and stay just doing that.
Did you do any kind of morning sitting?
No, it doesn't. I don't seem to be wired quite for that.
Okay.
When I sit in the mornings, I very quickly fall asleep, or my mind just starts spinning out. I've tried it multiple times. It doesn't seem to gel the way I know that it can. Yeah.
Well, what about at night? Do you do anything specific before bedtime?
Not practice related, no.
So you get so tired, you just go to bed and fall asleep?
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
Yeah, usually just read for a little while or something, but it's very easy for me to kind of skip across the top of sleep if I don't make a dedicated effort to just not be busy doing something. So that's kind of my thing. Most of my regular practice stuff will usually happen sometime in the afternoon. Most of my days I have a bit of a lull around 1 or 2 or maybe 3 or 4, where I finish most of the stuff that needs to be done and have a bit of just this quiet time. And if I do a sitting, or if I do some of the exercises you've given us during that time, I'm able to be more fully present for them.
Jonathan, what about you? Do you do anything in the morning? Anything before you go to bed?
Yeah, I'll try to relax. Sometimes I may have a book or not. And usually before sleep, I'll check in and try and feel, do self-sensing and try to relax everything as much as possible. Lately, one of the things I've been doing is trying to make sure that I don't go to the bathroom at night. It's something I've been habituated to doing, even just once, not necessarily because it's an unhealthy thing or a healthy thing, but just not to disturb the entire stretch of sleep. So I'll deliberately, withdraw water intake recently, longer than I've been maybe I'd like to, and it's started stopping doing that. But yes, usually I'll just do some self-sensing, and in the morning I may do a practice that I've been learning here, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, or just the sensation going up and then the relaxing going down. I may do that quickly for 5-10 minutes before I actually get up and do something.
Okay, Guido, do you do anything at night and in the morning?
In the morning, usually my dog goes to near my bed and started, to wake me up. So it's an immediate, reminder that I have to get up and get the dog out.
Yeah.
So I have to get up.
I've trained this guy. He waits 10 minutes. He's very furry now. He's a standard poodle, so but he waits 10 minutes. He initially, when he was a puppy, he would know I was awake and he'd be there looking at me saying, "Walk now." Whoops, I shouldn't use that word. So yeah, so your dog wakes you up and then he has to go out.
Then I am.
Well, I think you may have frozen, Guido.
I started forgetting myself for a while.
Okay.
After I take the dog for a while, then I start forgetting myself.
Yeah.
Usually I have to go out to go to the city, and in the way to the city, I do the 60-bone exercise. Sometimes about 20 minutes to do one.
Yeah. Yeah.
To do the whole exercise 3 times. Because of the attention I have to put on the driving.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes 20 minutes to do 3 times the 60-bone exercise. So that's a lot,
That's a lot, yeah.
20 minutes for 3 times.
Yeah, yeah. At any rate, let's do an inner exercise now. I like to begin an inner exercise with the recognition that I am doing this work for myself. I'm doing this work for my fellow human being. And I'm doing this work for the earth herself. So it's always good to focus our intent. And in terms of bedtime, it's always good to focus our intent before we go to bed, to fix something in our mind, perhaps some feeling of joy or peace or love or gratitude, to go to bed and go to sleep with some kind of an intent, and to begin inner exercises with some kind of intent. And I'm going to do J.G. Bennett's 60-point exercise and then move into Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. So for J.G. Bennett's 60-point exercise, we move down 30 points down one side of the body and up 30 points in the other side of the body. Breathing in awareness and breathing out tension. So just begin by breathing in awareness and breathing out tension in the top of our head. And then breathing in awareness and breathing out tension, the right side of our forehead. The right side of our nose and face. Our right ear and the finer muscles in the right side of our head. The right side of our mouth and jaw. The right side of our neck and shoulder. Our right upper arm and right elbow. Our right lower arm and wrist. The top of our right hand. Our right thumb. Our right index finger. Right middle finger. Right fourth finger. Right baby finger. The palm of our right hand. Breathing in awareness and breathing out tension to the right side of our chest. The right side of our midriff and abdomen. The right side of our upper back. The right side of our lower back. Our right hip and buttock. Our right upper leg and knee. Our right lower leg and ankle. The top of our right foot. Our right big toe. Second toe. Middle toe. Fourth toe. Baby toe. The bottom of our right foot. And now reversing this process, breathing in awareness and breathing out tension to the bottom of our left foot. Our left baby toe. Our left fourth toe. Middle toe. Second toe. Big toe. The top of our left foot. Our left ankle and lower leg. Our left knee and upper leg. Our left buttock and hip. The left side of our lower back. the left side of our upper back, our left abdomen and the left side of our solar plexus and midriff, the left side of our chest, our left palm, left baby finger, left fourth finger, left middle finger, index finger, our left thumb, the top of our left hand, our left wrist and lower arm, our left elbow and upper arm, our left shoulder and neck, the left side of our jaw and mouth, the left side of our head and our left ear, the left side of our face and nose, our left eye, the left side of our forehead, and then finishing at the crown of our head. And now I just want you to pay attention to your breathing. And this is not part of J.G. Bennett's exercise, but I like adding this. And as you breathe out, let the energy and awareness flow down the right side of your body. And as you breathe in, pull it up the left. So breathing your attention awareness down and out the right side of your body. And as you breathe in, just bring it up the left side of your body. Breathing out, down the right side of your body and breathing in up the left side of your body. And just circle around for a couple of breaths. And then allow your attention to rest. And this is Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. As a vessel fills with warm golden honey, imagine filling your body slowly with sensation. So begin by filling your toes with sensation, and then filling with sensation from your toes to your heels, and then filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet to your ankles, filling with sensation up through your lower legs to your knees, up through your upper legs to your hips and hands, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet all the way up to the lower part of your torso and your lower arms, filling with sensation up to your chest, upper arms, upper back, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet all the way up to your shoulders, up through your neck, and filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet all the way up to the top of your head, and sensing your body as one organic whole. Mr. Gurdjieff says, that when we engage in self-sensing, at least at the beginning, we should start with our feet and move up. So self-sensing moves up, relaxation moves down. But ultimately, we want to get to the point where we can sense our whole body in an instant to develop that sensation of self. So try to sense your whole self from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head, front to back, side to side. Try to develop that sensation of self. And then hold on to this awareness. Keep this awareness in the background as an act of intent. And I would like you to imagine that you're breathing in perhaps tiny particles of light. Represent this with your head brain. The head brain is the seat of our words and the pictures. So represent breathing in the active elements of the air in the form of tiny sparkles of light while sensing your body. And then as you breathe out, imagine breathing out a gray, foggy waste. So that's the imagination of the head brain while sensing your body. Breathing in sparkles of light, breathing out a gray, foggy waste. And then as you breathe in, become aware of a different quality, a feeling that flows into your solar plexus. And then as you breathe out, become aware of this feeling, this different quality flowing down to your reproductive organs. So there are 3 dimensions to this. One is the breathing in the sparkles of light and breathing out the gray fog. That's for the head brain. The other part is the sensation of self. That's the body brain. And then this quality that flows from our lungs into our solar plexus as we breathe in. And then as we breathe out, it flows from our solar plexus down to our reproductive organs is our feeling brain. So breathing in the sparkles of light, sensing our body, aware of that feeling flowing down into our solar plexus, breathing out the gray fog, aware of our body and aware of that feeling flowing down to our reproductive organs. And let's just add one further dimension. As we breathe in, think the word I, and then as we breathe out, think the word am. So breathing in the sparkles of light, thinking the word I as we feel that feeling flowing down into our solar plexus while sensing our body. And then as we breathe out the word am, we feel that feeling descend into our solar plexus as we breathe out a gray, foggy waste. And let's just do this for a minute. Breathing in the word I and breathing out the word am. And then just allow your attention to rest and become aware that you have an atmosphere surrounding your body. Now, this atmosphere can be drawn away. You think of someone and your atmosphere can disperse towards them. So keep your atmosphere collected. Keep it about a meter, meter and a half. That's, 4 to 6 feet in diameter. Try to become aware of its boundary around you. And keep the energy, keep your atmosphere calm and collected. We can disturb our atmosphere with our thoughts, with our feelings, with our sensations. So keep your thoughts still, your feelings calm, and your sensations tranquil. And just allow this atmosphere to be calm, serene, tranquil. And in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 to 3. And when I get to 3, breathe it in. And then as you breathe back out after that, imagine that a part of it remains within you. 1, 2, 3. Now breathe it in. And then as you breathe out, imagine a part of it remains within you. And then let's finish with an affirmation. And just silently in your mind, repeat after me. May results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And then, as I always say, Mr. Gurdjieff says that after we do inner work, particularly on our own in the mornings, we should not run off. We should stay and remain as collected as possible. There are emanations, there are particles that we are actually working with that we can use and that will help grow our inner being, what Mr. Gurdjieff called our Kesdjan body. And he said we want to give time and allow the emanations of the inner work to settle within ourselves. Now, last week, we talked about self-observation. And I read a passage of Mr. Gurdjieff's that was, in Peter Uspensky's In Search of the Miraculous, where Mr. Gurdjieff talked about self-observation. And he differentiated self-observation from self-analysis. And he says we shouldn't really spend a lot of time at the beginning trying to analyze our observations. Quite often, that is just the words, the associative mind, just using verbal formulas to try to believe it's the master or in control. The associative mind, the verbal mind, the mind that just starts talking and talking and talking is probably one of the lowest dimensions of our mind. So when we get caught up in that dimension of our mind, we're actually transforming at the mental level a very low level of energy. And self-observation at the beginning, there should be a level of purity to it. Now, as I also mentioned last week, that any time we come across in the teachings the word self with a hyphen, that indicates a higher level. It indicates an action that's mindful, or to use Mr. Gurdjieff's term, personal consciousness. So self-observation is an act of mindful awareness. It's stepping up to the next level of energy. And what we really want to observe is our machine-like self. There's a part of us that exists in world 48 that is very habitual, very mechanical, very automatic. It's what Mr. Gurdjieff termed the man-machine. And that man-machine is fueled by hydrogen-48. It's fueled by the energy of world-48. When we step up to the next level, when we step up to the level of being personally conscious, which we would now call mindfulness, we're actually transforming hydrogen 24, stepping up into world 24. World 48 is the earthly realm. World 24 is the planetary realm. World 24 is also the realm of essence. So we're stepping up into a different level to engage in self-observation. But as we do that, we are no longer a machine. In that moment of mindful awareness, we have stepped beyond that automatic, habitual, mechanical self. And so this presents us with a paradox, because when we're in the automatic, habitual, mechanical state, where we're little more than slaves and machines and automatons, we're not really able to observe ourselves. When we observe ourselves, we're actually stepping beyond that. And as I mentioned last week, by doing that, we actually take a tiny little snapshot of our state immediately before we stepped into that moment, that awareness, that self-observation. And when we collect enough of these snapshots, these photographs, we can begin to put them together and assemble them in a more coherent fashion. So this is the paradox and the problem of self-observation. A machine is unable to observe itself. A machine lacks that self-reflectivity. So when we observe ourselves, at the most, we can get a tiny little imperceptible taste of what we were like at the lower level. And it's very important for us to determine, to see ourselves, to get an accurate picture of our machine-like self, of the self that exists on that level. Because that self is our biggest obstacle. That's where we leak energy. That's where we waste energy. And we're all different. One of us may leak energy through the associative mind, through the twirling of those thoughts and the repetitive thoughts every day. Another may do it because they shake their leg all day and they're just moving their body. And another may do it by being filled with negative emotions, or lying, where we claim authority over things and understanding of things that we don't. There are a number of different ways that we leak this energy, and we leak them through all of the different ways. So identification, internal considering, negative emotions, associative thinking, lying, daydreaming, imagination, all of that. But we need to build up a picture of ourselves to try to figure out where we ourselves are leaking the energy. And in the quote that I read last week, Mr. Gurdjieff said, initially, what we should be trying to do is to categorize each moment of self-observation. Is this my head brain? Is this my body brain? Is this my feeling brain? And our body brain can be subdivided into the moving center and the instinctual center. So to observe myself reaching for a door handle, that's part of the moving center. To observe myself as I am right now, speaking, the muscles, the movement of my vocal cords, that's part of the moving center. He said, to become aware of light, color, red, that awareness is an instinctual awareness. Hot and cold is an instinctual awareness. The sensation of the texture of the clothing against our body is an instinctual awareness. The walking up a set of stairs, observing ourselves as we walk, is observing the moving center. And he said also to become aware of our intellectual center, the head brain. The intellectual center works through comparisons. So you go to the grocery store and you look at one apple and you compare it to another apple, and which apple are you going to place in your basket? Well, one you notice has a bit of a bruise on it, the other doesn't. That's an act of comparison. And he said the way we can distinguish of the feeling center is the feeling center, it's always either unpleasant or pleasant. There are no indifferent feelings. So we either feel good, pleasant, or we feel unpleasant. So initially when we engage in self-observation, it's to work, with these 4 possible observations and to begin to try to classify whatever we observe in that moment, that tiny snapshot when we became aware and we began to observe ourselves. Is it my moving center? Is it my instinctual center? Is it my feeling center? Is it my intellectual center? Am I comparing? Am I pleased or displeased? Does it involve some kind of habitual automatic movement, such as reaching for a door handle or shaking a hand? Or is it, being aware of hot and cold, pleasure, pain, color? Part of the moving center, as a hypnotherapist, there was a very famous hypnotherapist by the name of Milton Erickson. He was a psychiatrist and a medical doctor. And he developed a whole branch of hypnosis that we now call either Ericksonian hypnosis or conversational hypnosis. He discovered that there was this automatic moving routine involved in shaking hands. And we've shaken so many hands, and we don't think about the steps involved. We don't think about what we had to learn. But he discovered that if when someone was reaching their hand towards him, he flipped it, put it up so that they looked at it, and told them to go into a trance. In other words, there's this automatic routine that's involved in shaking hands. And if he broke that routine and told people to go into a trance, they would go into a trance. So when we walk towards a set of stairs, we step up always with the same foot. The other night, I was going down these stairs in a hall, and it was dark. And yet my feet, even though I couldn't see the steps, I had no problem. Part of my moving center had learned an automatic routine for stairs. If I had never, ever stepped on a stairs before, I might have slipped, I might have fallen, but there was something inside me that was so acquainted with steps that it was very easy, even though I couldn't see the steps, it was dark, to just follow them down to the bottom. So, anyone had any observations that they've made this week? Any comments about self-observation, about what they've observed?
Well, one thing that I've been observing lately is that the manifestations and words that I say in the outer world used to bother me a lot afterwards, and I would say, oh, that was so stupid, or criticize myself. I've gotten to the point where I don't judge that in the same harsh way, but now it's returned to mental thoughts about people, or bad thoughts now have much more potency to make me feel bad about myself. So it's been an interesting realization that outwardly, I don't care that much anymore about things that I do, unless they're harming someone else. But just when I feel stupid or I didn't know something, I used to get very concerned about that. Coming from academia, I needed to know. But now I just can't bear the thoughts that I have sometimes about other people. And I'm trying to get over the judgmentalness in that aspect of observing myself.
Is it thought that's disturbing you, or is the thought triggering an unpleasant feeling?
Interesting. I think it's both. I mean, I think it's having the thought, but then the thought rolls into, I shouldn't have that thought. And so it's wanting a purification that isn't going to come by judging myself, because the other kind of lessening of judging came from letting it go and not caring about other people's perceptions of my feelings of stupidity.
For you right now, you are judging your thoughts.
Yeah, more than I wish I could.
And they're creating a negative emotion inside you.
Yes.
I mean, Mr. Gurdjieff said that not all negative emotions are bad and useless. This is a mistake, one of the mistakes that entered in through Spensky into the teachings. However, 99% of them are bad. There is a certain utility to certain negative emotions, but we rarely experience that. The negative emotions that we normally experience, if you really dig deep, you will notice hidden beneath them is the ego.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're judging yourself and you're feeling bad, and there's a quality of me involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
These thoughts that you have, are they really that bad?
I don't think they're that bad, but I'll just think to myself, oh, what a jerk, or
Yeah.
just commentary in my mind about other people that it doesn't need to be there. I don't like it.
I mean, Mr. Gurdjieff says the associative mind associates. The lungs breathe, the associative mind associates, and you can't stop it from associating. So those words will go on. And he says those associations can continue for a short time after our death. It's a very mechanical part of the mind. I know that for myself, I sometimes find these associative thoughts going on, and I suddenly realize, there's a certain level of judgmental. Oh, they're so fat, or something like that. And I've realized that those words were programmed into me when I was a very small child. They were my mother's words. My mother would walk around and judge people. Oh, they're so fat, or oh, they look at how much they're eating. And as a child, I absorbed that. And so now when I have those thoughts, I'll look at someone and go, oh, they're so fat. And I'll go, that came from my mom, and I'll laugh. And it doesn't stop the thoughts, but rather than getting caught up in beating myself up for those thoughts, I understand where they came from, that they were imprinted in me. They were programmed into me at a very, very young age. I had a very judgmental mother who was always criticizing people, didn't matter who they were. And I sometimes find those words floating around inside my head. And I did used to beat myself up and get upset that I was thinking those thoughts. And now I just realized that, this goes way back. They weren't my thoughts. They were kind of programmed into me. Is there any, in your background, could your thoughts, those negative thoughts that you have, could they have been programmed into you?
Oh, definitely. Here, my mother, we walked into my sister's wedding and she says, oh, everyone on our side is so much more attractive. That's the bottom line of her level of judgmentalness. It's constant. And my husband has a very judgmental quality to him too, that he's imparted to my children. So it's a very heavy family trait. And I've been that way too. I see that I've lived many years of my life, lived in a college town, and would drive around and say, oh, she's cute, he's adorable, that one's ugly. Just the whole coming down the street, someone, those are ugly shoes. I don't even know the person, and I don't care about their shoes. I would like to be able to have more domination over those kinds of judgmental thoughts.
Okay. I mean, that's a very good, it's a very profound observation. Being aware of those thoughts. So do you know what the exact feeling is
Usually
that arises after
yeah,
when,
putting myself down for having the thought.
so like criticizing, is it an anger directed inwards?
No, it's more like, I don't need to have a thought like that. In a way that, since I've been working on this, has become less harsh on myself. But it's still there, and I don't see any need for that, because one of my biggest aims in this work is to become a purer person in the thought processes that go on in my mind.
So you have a negative thought, and then you catch yourself having the negative thought, and then you have a negative emotion.
Yes, that I
Um,
thought.
can you laugh at yourself?
Sometimes I can, especially when absolutely ridiculous thought.
Yeah. I mean, the negative emotion is a misuse of C12. It's a misuse of the sexual energy that should be used to help to augment the sensation of self or develop the sensation of self. And the energy is stolen by the emotional center. And it's got a taste. Mr. Gurdjieff said that beneath it is the taste of vehemence, but I've noticed that beneath it is the taste of the ego, my own sense of self-importance. And so one of the things that I've discovered that my ego hates is to be laughed at. And so rather than, I have the judgmental thought, and rather than further poisoning myself with that negative feeling, I laugh at myself. And I go, there's your mother speaking in your mind. She's been dead 5 years and she's still there in your mind. And by doing that and doing it over and over and over again, and in that moment when I catch that thought and knowing that it wasn't really my thought, it was programmed into me. It was programmed into the mechanical part of myself. I mean, how can you beat yourself up for allowing something like that to be programmed into yourself at such a young age? I mean, eventually these things take on a life of their own. For instance, I have clients who come in and they say, I'm so stupid. And their thoughts are, I'm an idiot, I'm stupid, I can't believe I did that. And invariably, through hypnosis, I can trace it back to their childhood. And there were adults in their childhood or siblings. Quite often, more often, it's actually siblings saying, you're stupid, you're a loser. And so they internalize that dialogue. So I'm stupid, I'm a loser. So when whoever it was who was saying it to them, or when other people say it to them, it doesn't hurt as much. It starts out sort of as a fortress, as a protective mechanism, and then it becomes a prison. But if you say, I'm a loser, I'm stupid, and someone comes and says, oh, you're such a loser, you're so stupid, if you've had that thought first, it's not as painful. It doesn't hurt as much. So as children, a lot of the associative thoughts, particularly the judgmental ones and the negative ones, they go way, way, way back. And if they go back into childhood, how can we be held responsible for those thoughts? You can be responsible for the way you react to those thoughts, for that emotional judgment. I mean, another thing to talk about is acting opposite to emotion. This is not from Mr. Gurdjieff. This is from dialectical behavior therapy. What is it to be first to try and do your best to name that negative emotion. And we have, we have a head brain, a body brain, and a feeling brain. Love is more cerebral, peace is more physical, and joy is more emotional. And the opposite of love is not hate, it's anger. The opposite of peace is fear. And the opposite of joy is despair. Now, these emotions can be mingled. So we can have sort of a angry fear or a fearful despair or whatever. But just trying to observe the emotion and label the emotion. This is actually a profound act of mindfulness. Any act of mindfulness involves an inward detachment. In order to be mindful of my hands and the skin in my hands and the bones in my hands and my fingers, I actually have to inwardly detach into the observer position to observe my hands. The same with the emotions. Whenever we try to label and name our emotions, we actually have to engage in an act of mindful awareness. Step away from the emotion, look at the emotion, and say, what is this emotion? And try to name it. My guess is, from what you're saying, it's some variance of anger. So impatience, annoyance, frustration, they're all qualities, and they've got a slightly different feeling, but they're all different aspects of anger. To try to name the feeling, what is it? Do you feel disgusted with yourself? Do you feel frustrated? Do you feel annoyed? So the next time it happens, try to step back and look at that emotion and analyze that emotion. Try to figure out what it is. Now, as love and hate are polarities, and emotions only become polarized, according to J.G. Bennett, from world 24 down. So in world 12, in the realm of the real I, there are no divided emotions. There's no love and anger, peace and fear. It's a unit of emotion. But at the level of essence, at the level of world 24, there's an opposite to the emotion. So, if it's frustration, what is the opposite of frustration? There has to be some kind of a loving quality to it, some variant of love. So try to name that emotion that comes up. And the emotional center, it's so quick. It just comes right up, and it's so much stronger and more powerful than our conscious mind, because it operates with a higher energy than our conscious mind. But observe and observe and observe and observe, and try to create that inward separation. Mr. Gurdjieff said we have to separate ourself from ourself. And, this is in mindfulness, detachment, to detach in order to observe what that emotion is. Separate from that emotion, look at that emotion, name that emotion, and then try to figure out the opposite. And so, a positive and a negative. So you find yourself judging someone, you get that negative emotion, and if you can learn to summon the positive emotion, you can cancel that negative emotion out. And eventually you do that enough and you don't have that negative emotion. So, this is a very advanced form of self-observation. It's a very advanced form of work on oneself. And for someone who's new to the work, it's well beyond their ability, but you're not new to this work. And you should be able to try to figure out at least what that emotion is. Do you have any idea what the emotion is?
I think part of it is irritation with myself for falling into the trap of being judgmental.
Okay. So irritation.
That's probably it. But I'm
Yeah.
going to pay attention to this. This is really, really helpful, Allan. Thank
Yeah.
you so
Yeah.
much. I'm going to think about this, and maybe next week I'll have something to contribute
Okay.
about my observations on this.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? I guess we lost Ian. Jonathan, do you engage in self-observation?
Yeah, I try to as much as I can. I try to create a life that supports that, and to do activities most of the time that support that as well, and to be in a relationship that supports that with myself and with someone else.
Or do you have particular traps you fall into? You know, maybe not traps, but holes,
Yeah,
emotions.
yeah, of course. Yeah, impatience. Sometimes the energy from the instinctive center, kind of messing with feeling of impatience can make me see things that aren't there, kind of almost like a paranoid idea or something like that. It's something I've been aware of for definitely a long time, and it has been improving since doing these meetings. I've tried to do a lot of different things to work particularly with impatience.
Just naming it requires that active mindful awareness and the detachment. When you're stuck in the emotion, you experience it in the first person, and you're in that state of emotional identification. And so when we actually detach and look at it, we are disidentifying with the emotion. So just learning how to step back inwardly, separate from that emotion, and name it. Do you try to do anything to deal with the emotion, or do you just try to detach from it?
I try to do both. So separating myself from it, usually I'm able to do that. And if something is not provoking me while I'm in a mechanical state, which by definition of if I'm behaving mechanically, I don't know about it yet.
Yeah.
Right then and there, quite yet, there has to be some kind of an interaction. At least I think from what I observed in my life. So, for instance, yesterday. I'm an instructor to my partner in massage therapy. She's going to get her license from me, and she's learning structural body work. And it's really excellent conditions for inner work because of transference and things like that, using psychological terms. So she had been asking me to show her something, and not to show her, but to allow her to show me a demonstration of something that she learned in class, because she's also being taught in the same training, postgraduate training I had. And I would say yes, and I'd kind of be busy doing something later and later. So another time I just kind of did it rashly without collecting myself beforehand, got on the table, laid on the table, and as she started, I could feel myself being impatient, but I was too weak to collect myself right then and there. I was sweaty. I was just being eaten alive by gnats while exercising outside. And I wasn't aware of myself strongly enough, being able to sense myself. So I started being snippy and behaving kind of snippy and kind of grouchy, while I was not supposed to be doing that. And my partner, obviously, the way our relationship is organized is she does not, tells me what it is that I'm doing right then and there. And I am just denying it and huffing and puffing and resisting. And she's like, go take a shower. So I go take a shower, and I go to the RV after, and she's coming, and she's in emotional upheaval. And even then, I've gotten a lot better doing this, of not letting this go as long. But if she's feeling emotional, I may say something like, why are you crying? Maybe not with as much humor or anything like that, but some irritation. Why are you crying? And then she'd explain everything to me. And thankfully, I think towards this work and some work I've been doing too recently, I was able to kind of catch myself and apologize at first in a bustle, like in a puffy, kind of way, saying, I'm sorry, obviously showing how frustrated I am and incapable of collecting myself. And I sat in the RV for about 20, 30 minutes. I did it self-remembering. I went inside. I didn't say anything. I just minded my own business, and I tried to let my being express my remorse. And she came over, and very kindly, she gave me a kiss, and it was very nice. And then everything was fine from then on out. So that's just an example.
You illustrate actually there's something that's very important for people to understand. This is all about energy. This is all about the transformation of energy. If we use up all our energy in one big blowout or whatever, we don't have the resources within us to be able to step up into that higher state, that higher level. We've got to reaccumulate, so to speak, that energy. It's like we've got to fill the gas tank up again. Mr. Gurdjieff says that every morning when we wake up, we should have enough energy to do inner work throughout the day, but we waste it, we explode it, we throw it away. And so we don't have that available. And there are a number of ways, sort of hacks or tricks, they're not really tricks, that we can use. One of them is in the morning to do the conscious breathing. We bring in higher molecules from the air through that conscious breathing, through what we did sort of at the end, towards the end of the exercise this morning. The breathing in, and imagine it going to our solar plexus and then further down. That gives us a little bit more energy. He calls it, or the process is we're breathing in active elements in the air. And another important one is the quality of our sleep. Mr. Gurdjieff said quality is more important than quantity. So if we don't get a proper sleep, if our sleep is disturbed, it becomes problematic. And another one that he talked about was that it's very important to focus on our diet. Mr. Gurdjieff was a master chef. Not a lot of people know this, but one of the ways he made money was that he would open restaurants, get them going, and sell them. And if you've read about, the meals that he used to make, phenomenal meals for people who would come, and they would crowd into a small apartment in Paris, and they couldn't even move around, and plates would get, handed to people, and they couldn't get up and walk out because there were just too many bodies there. But he had a room, apparently now they filled it with books, and people are going, it's not authentic, because you can go and have a tour of his apartment. They still have it with the Gurdjieff Foundation. He used to have spices, and he would say to certain people, look at those spices, and there's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, and the octaves and everything in the spices and in the food. And the active ingredients of the food that we eat is also something that's very important. So to really focus on our diet, to breathe consciously, to make sure that we sleep properly. These give us a solid foundation for inner work. Whereas if we don't sleep properly, if we just eat junk food without any kind of real active elements or nutritional value, or we don't breathe properly, we don't bring that conscious awareness to our breath, we don't have nearly as much energy as we could have if we did things properly. And once we run out of energy, we have to let it accumulate again. I mean, he talked about various accumulators in the body, and once an accumulator is empty, it's empty and it's got to fill up again. And if we really push ourselves, you know, if we go on a 20-mile walk or whatever, we may push into the great accumulator. But otherwise, we've just got to wait, perhaps calm down, perhaps quiet ourselves, let that energy build up. So when you described how, even though, you know, you were aware, and she was pointing out, you know, some of your behavior, that you actually had to go and, you know, do a little bit of inner work and get that quietness in order to accumulate that energy again, to get into that stable state. So to be aware that we are cosmic apparatuses, using Mr. Gurdjieff's wonderful term, or Beelzebub's wonderful term, cosmic apparatuses designed for the transformation of energies. And as Mr. Gurdjieff said, every thought, every feeling, every movement, every action requires fuel. So you think a certain thought, and that's fueled by a certain fuel. You have a certain feeling, that's fueled by a certain fuel. And if we're leaking energy, and if we've wasted energy, and if we've expended all the energy, we can't really step up the way we should. So you notice that you had to just go and calm yourself down and allow yourself to reaccumulate that energy. Guido, any comments?
Yeah.
Okay, your sound is not too good. Okay. Yeah, Guido. Yeah, that's Guido. I'm gonna have to. Yeah. Yeah. Guido, I'm gonna have to cut you off. Just your sound is.
Sound is not very good.
No,
you cannot hear me.
We can't hear you. No.
You cannot clearly hear me.
No.
You cannot hear.
It's like it's, no, it's you cannot. No, we can't hear you. Unfortunately, so we're
Hello.
Yeah. Let me just. Okay. Ian said that he's not feeling well, so he had to step away. I guess it's, it was 7:30 in the morning, or now it's 8:30 in the morning in Portland, Oregon. Any other comments? Questions?
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm doing inner work, one of the things I've been working on is really trying to vivify the sense of the plexus inside of myself. That's something I feel like I've been able to access more from making the distinction between sensation and feeling. So when I'm doing self-sensing and feeling the solar plexus, I had an experience yesterday, actually 2 days ago, where I was getting worked on, and some of the work that I was getting worked on there was a stroke in the solar plexus where he would open from the abdomen completely up right in the middle of the solar plexus at a depth that is extremely deep. So at that point, I really had a feeling of just wanting to move and to move away, to go away, to divert my sensation from that pure experience. It seemed like nothing but discomfort, and it seemed connected to my stomach. That the desire to accumulate was also somehow connected to the dread that I felt at that moment of making direct contact with the solar plexus in a very visceral way. So when I'm doing self-sensing work and I'm feeling my solar plexus, I do feel sometimes momentarily, sometimes prolonged, almost like a feeling of nausea or dread. It's not overwhelming, but it's subtle. And it's a feeling that I can tell is connected to a real feeling of gravity. But at the same time, I'm wondering if there is that how the feeling of the solar plexus kind of is? It's just a sobering, it can be dreadful because, associations or energy or leakages that are not serving us anymore are being, so to speak, dissolved. How would you explain that?
Well, I mean, in terms of the work that I do, I deal with a lot of people. Probably the number one thing is anxiety. I mean, it's not 50% of my clients, but the number one thing I deal with are people who suffer from feelings of anxiety. And we have an anxiety circuit that starts with the amygdala. It's about 2 inches behind our eyes, goes to the hypothalamus, the pituitary, down to the adrenal glands. And it releases and it creates this whole biochemical change within ourselves. And one of the outcomes of the anxiety circuit being triggered is the blood is pulled away from the stomach and the digestive process. And when we have anxiety, it could be low-level anxiety. We live in a fear-based economy, a fear-based world. You turn the news on and it's all there to provoke fear, to provoke anxiety. And so quite often, it's actually a lack of blood in the stomach that's causing that. And people perceive that as a feeling of dread. And that was the word that you used, dread. Two other things that happen when the anxiety circuit's triggered. The same thing happens to the neocortex. We don't need the neocortex if we're in danger when it really should be triggered, so we don't think as clearly. The blood is in the primitive part of our brain, the limbic part of our brain, the medial part. Those parts are properly fed, but the higher part isn't. And another thing it does, it turns off the immune system. This is supposed to, when we're running from a bear or a predator, we don't need to be digesting the food. We don't need to be thinking higher thoughts. We need to be running. But in the world that we live in today, we live in a fear-based society. The media is all fear-based. Even the top television shows, they're all drama and the cop shows. You're gripping your seats and, the adrenaline and norepinephrine and things like that are flooding through your system. And so we live in this low level of chronic anxiety. I know that I suffered from it for a long time. I don't watch television anymore. I don't watch movies. I don't like them playing with my emotions and trying to put me into that stress, fight or flight state. And I noticed, I don't do a lot of watching of news or reading of news. And last night I was reading some news, reading newspaper. I was reading this online magazine called Raw Story. And, it was about Trump this and Trump that. And I noticed the anxiety levels in me were rising and feeling it in my stomach and that sense of dread. And it's like, why am I poisoning myself with this? I like to keep sort of abreast on what's going on, but I don't need to go to any real depth of the news. Just it was bad for me. And this is what there is no new world order. There's no cabal of people controlling things. But, this is kind of what the people who control the media, control industry, there's no single players. But they want to keep us in a state of helplessness. They want to keep us in a state of anxiety. If you're anxious, you're not going to be a problematic employee. You're going to be, more of a sheeple. If you're anxious, you're not going to try and change things. So it's not like there's a single group of people keeping us enslaved. But it's what happens when we exist at the level of man-machine. We're very prone to anxiety, very prone to dread, very prone to those feelings in our stomach and the digestive process. And to step up into the mindful state, to begin to change that, is, to me, part of the mystical path, part of the journey that we're on. Did you suffer from a little bit of anxiety, Jonathan?
Yeah. I was, I was also very confident, and I've always kind of try to dig deeper into some feeling of self-empowerment too, but particularly through high school and growing up, anxiety. I was an only child, and it was in my, not that I refer to this all the time, but I did get a natal chart by a pretty good astrologer, and it was in my chart, and I'm sure everyone had it to some degree too, but there was a harshness to my younger years, like upbringing, a harshness that just isn't quite there anymore. But it was there for a long time, and it influenced a lot of my desire to create a certain life where I feel like I could cultivate myself without constantly feeling threatened by my environment. But eventually, I through developing a personality, kind of evaded some of the threats from other people, things like character, slandering and bullying, and that constant harshness from your environment, particularly from family that came from my father's side. My father's from Cuba, so I grew up with a lot of cousins that, although they're very different now in some ways, not at all, I was kind of different than everybody else. My father was a bastard child, and their grandmother was somebody who my father's father, my grandfather, had an extramarital affair with. And my father was an only child, and with his mom and his other brother growing up poor, he came here in his early 20s to create a life. And with my mother, and that some of that, when all the family got reunited here, some of that a lot of that harshness. And I remember my cousin telling me that, well, you're not really part of the family, like by blood, that kind of a thing. And it was just always very, it was just harsh, the harshness, and it's particularly in the heart, and the anxiety from your innocence being trammeled by your environment, seeing it, that kind of creativity or sensitivity seen as a threat or something that needs to be destroyed so you can be made harder and strong, or something like that. But it's work that I've been dealing with for a long time, but it does come from that instinctive, because a lot of my good qualities come from being able to make contact with the instinctive center in a good way, and kind of maybe a clairvoyant, protective, proactive, doing good work with that and helping that nourish my will. But at other times it creates paranoia. Nowadays the paranoia isn't always directed toward making people feel subhuman, but usually around protecting your health, or protecting a certain integrity of life, protecting these energies, sometimes overcompensating for that, because that's been something I've been trying to build for so long, because maybe like a bubble from my environment, but in another way, so that I can do inner work ultimately, because I do feel like, even though this world, there can be a lot of elements that are harmful for the body, and that can be difficult for inner work, but at the same time there's a balance where all these undesirable conditions are good conditions. A lot of my work is trying to make that distinction between what is a really good condition, what's not, what can I do about it, what can't I do about it, how can I keep myself collected, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, as a hypnotherapist, the subconscious mind is very amenable to imagery. Through the correct imagery and the manipulation of the correct imagery, we can actually change subconscious processes that are supposed to be beyond our control. One of the things they teach sort of new hypnotherapists or people being trained is something called the lemon experience, where they have you relax yourself and imagine with your mind going into your kitchen and opening your fridge and pulling out a lemon and feeling the coolness and then slicing it and then biting into it. And in that moment, to become aware of how the moisture in your mouth has increased, which shouldn't happen. That's supposed to be an automatic response that we can't control, but we can. And so people, who have that feeling of dread in the stomach, we have a lot of blood vessels, we've got veins, arteries going into our stomach that help with the digestive process. And when we're in the anxious state, that blood is pulled away from the stomach and put into the large muscles so we can either fight or run, fight or flight. But just to imagine that blood flowing back into the stomach, just using that, the visual image along with an awareness of your stomach. When you talked about becoming aware of your solar plexus, is it just a form of self-sensing?
As opposed to?
I'm just trying to figure out. Well, it's just you just bring your sensory awareness back to your stomach.
Self-sensing in the solar plexus area, and sometimes, the blockage on the left side, and I'm always trying to and that's always something kind of connected to the dread. It's not difficult to be able to sense the whole solar plexus with my whole being. Before it was very, very, very difficult, but these days, it's the dread is still there.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm curious about, is that it's still kind of there, and I understand that it makes me do a rash decision, a rash thought, a rash action. It makes me behave mechanically sometimes because I'm not able to stomach the feeling of dread that was there beforehand. I'm not able to stomach it. Sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't. And that's kind of what I feel. Yeah.
Well, just creating some kind of a visual image, a metaphor. And it doesn't have to be blood flowing back into the stomach. It could be the tide coming in. There are many different ways we can represent this to give our subconscious mind an image of what we want it to do. Now, the thing about that dread and everything is these feelings actually that we have, they all go back before the age of 8. Mr. Gurdjieff said that we have not had a new feeling since approximately the age of 8. Our feeling center is complete by the age of 8. Neuroscience is backing this up. In terms of my work as a hypnotherapist, most of the problematic emotions we experience are 95% of them go back before the age of 5, and about 50% of them go back before the age of 3. So these are really, really ancient emotions. As a hypnotherapist, I've got a set of skills that I can use to help people go back and revivify and reawaken the moment that they first felt a feeling and begin to deal with it at its source. But that requires someone going into the somnambulous state, and it's actually the bread and butter of what I do with age regression. But I can't do that with an online group. But to recognize that this is an ancient feeling, and perhaps to just even imagine seeing yourself at 4 years of age, feeling dread and talking to your 4-year-old self and saying, hey, look, I'm you in the future, and it's okay. There are many different, imaginal exercises that we can do that can hack into the body's physiology. But I would, focus on blood flowing back and the tide coming in, and, maybe filling up a glass or whatever. And because that feeling of dread is the blood being pulled away as a result of the anxiety circuit being tripped. So
I feel like it interferes with me substantiating energies as well as I could with the third center around the reproductive organ.
Yeah.
And it interferes specifically with that, which I feel like is so important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, Mr. Gurdjieff is an I am exercise to focus on the solar plexus. And, he said this is the seat of the I, our individuality. So it's very important to bring our awareness to that area, the solar plexus of our body.
Would you mind sharing that exercise?
I'll look it up and I'll see if I can. It's one of his I am exercises.
Okay.
Did you have something to say, Karen?
I was just going to say that in reference to Jonathan's dread and anxiety and your comment that the subconscious mind is very reactive to imagery, I am in the world of art, always have been, and I find that for me, I have several images that are totally relaxing to me and have been there for years. And one of them would be, I would suggest to Jonathan, get a Renaissance Madonna and child, the Madonna holding the child in her arms, where that you relate to the expression on the woman's face, because there you get a whole sense of being loved, being adored. I relate to the child as being protected and cared for, and the relationship of the mother and child goes back to the very beginning of your life. And for me, that has been a standard way to, I don't want to say self-calming. I know that's not a good thing to do, but the image helps me stay in my body. It's about bodies, it's about feeling, it's about emotion. And I can get into a very high sensing looking at one of those images.
Yeah, I mean, self-calming is something that's very mechanical. You're talking about something that's mindful, something that requires that self-reflectivity and that higher level of energy and awareness. So it's not self-calming, even though it calms yourself. It's, you know, it's not like drowning it out, which is how a lot of people deal with anxiety.
It's making it greater, it's removing the dread by something that is so universal, so it works for me. I'm just saying, maybe John.
Thank you.
Okay. At any rate, I'd like to
and maybe there's many different kinds of images. Those are the ones that I relate.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. It's now 12 o'clock or 12:01. I've got a client very soon, so I'm going to have to go. Hopefully you will enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Try to self-sense. Try to be present as much as you can. And we'll see you again next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We don't sound now.
Yeah, it's sort of